Hey, what's up? Liron here. In this video, I'm going to teach you step by step how to paint this lovely scene with two boats. It's a very unique composition, in my opinion, something I don't normally do, and my focus here is on preserving the glow and shininess of the water's surface, because something I tend to do a lot is to mute too much and lose that vibrancy and even maybe darken too much. So that's the thing I want to work on, and with that being said, let's get started. So starting with the drawing, my goal here is to preserve the glow of water, okay? Many times I tend to lose that because I try to perhaps mimic the original value I see, and this leads to a bit of a more muted and sometimes boring result. So I'm gonna do my best to avoid that here. Easier said than done, but I think what I'll do is, at the expense of getting the right value, I'm gonna try and strive and aim for perhaps a lighter value, no matter what. Okay, so I'm just getting in these two boats in the middle. Now, as you may notice, the paper's orientation isn't exactly the same as the paintings. My paper is a bit more squashed, as the reference. The reference is a little more stretched. It's a little closer to square, in fact. But I'm not too worried about that because I can always play around in the areas around my subjects of interest. So if I'm putting in the boats here, as long as I position them just a little differently and I make this line a little lower, it's all going to work out in the end. Okay, so I'm not too worried about those kinds of things. And if you don't have the perfect shape of paper for the crop of what you're trying to paint, so to speak, you don't have to be too concerned about it. You can still change some stuff around and have it work, okay? So don't worry about that kind of thing too much. Now, I love the fact that this boat is faced more towards us. This one's a little more away from us so that we see more of this side of it, okay? Now we have all of these floats on the sides of the boat. And I'm gonna keep the drawing fairly simple here. You can probably barely see any details. And the pencil lines are barely visible, which is good. That's what I'm aiming for. We have a couple of boats here at the distance. I'm gonna try and get a good indication of them without getting into too many details. We have another boat right behind this one. And then at a bit more of a distance, we have this kind of a thing here. And hopefully these will make sense in the end. I'm only placing them in so that I remember where some of the lighter areas are. And I'm going to simplify my strategy with this too, because I want to pay close attention to the water here. So I don't want to have too many complex lines to work around and shapes to work around, negative paint and so on. So I'm just going to keep the structure of this painting very simple. It's just going to be these I'm going to avoid as highlights, the entire inside parts of the boats, okay? And that's it. That's pretty much it. I'm gonna cover everything else. One more thing, I'm gonna try and use more of an ultramarine kind of blue on outside, and then a more phthalo blue on the inside to get those boats popping and looking nicely. Now, just a couple of small details. We have this kind of a shadow within the boat. There are a bunch of items on it. There's this thing that I don't know what it's called, but you'll let me know. There are obviously a couple of ropes here. These are gonna look lovely later on. Just a couple of hints of details. This is gonna stay fairly impressionistic. I want this to be a quick one, but just to focus on the water. So now let's get to paint this. So first wash, and I'm gonna purposely work with too big of a brush. So here we go. My new Escoda size 16 Ultimo Sintetico. And what I'm gonna do with this is start with the water and paint basically everything around these boats. Now, as I said, I'll keep it fairly simple, not too many highlights to work around, just to make it a little easier for myself. Now, a lot of people are stressed about the initial wash because they're afraid of messing up the highlights and not getting it right. But what I want to show you here is how, at least how I approach this, I just visualize the whole thing as just what I'm avoiding. So I'm literally just seeing these two shapes, maybe a bit, just one highlight here or there, but that's basically it. I'm not seeing anything else but the things I have to avoid, okay? And remember that the first wash is very hard to fully mess up, so you're you'll probably do okay. Okay, at the very least, you'll probably do all right. Okay, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. So you see the boats here, warm colors for the boats. That's just what I'm doing. Warm colors for the boats, and then warm color for the side here. And as soon as I get to the water, I'm gonna start injecting more of the blue, like so. And these are all similar colors. It's a mix of the same ones. So this yellow is slightly dumbed down by some blue and so on. So you get a very harmonious look when it comes to the colors. Now here I do want to crank up the purity of the paint for the middle section of the water in particular, because I think that will help some of the feeling of light and vibrancy. So all I'm doing is working around the main shapes of the boats. I'm not even going around these white things protruding from them. I don't care about that at all. So boat, another boat. This part, just gonna get that kind of a thing here. Shouldn't have muted this, should have used that, but in any case. And then the lower I get, the stronger the blue becomes. And I'm not even using these that wet of a wash here really, but hopefully you get the point of what I'm doing. This, in theory, I could cover. I just don't want to work too hard around the floats, so let's just give it a simple kind of a thing like that. Cover this side should be left light, like so. And finally, a bit more green. Let's add for the first time here a bit green. And that finishes the initial wash pretty much. It's not a perfect wash, as you can see. It has a bit of unevenness. It's gonna dry not perfectly even probably, but I'm fine with that. I'm just gonna work my way around the floats, like so. There's gonna be this heavy shadow in any case under the boat, so I'm not too worried about that. This line should be at an angle. I got rid of one of them, one of the floats, and I think with that we're almost done. What I do want to add is a couple of ripples. These have to be added, you know, with a bit of thicker paint, otherwise it won't show in the wet surface of the water. So just adding them in random places, making them larger the closer it is to us, okay? This is something I'm still working on improving. My water ripple game could be a little better. I don't want to darken the entirety of the water down below. And a bit of that here. Let's put a bit of red in it. Being careful not to overdo it, but I think I still have some way to go until it's overdone. So here we go. I think now we'll let it dry, see what kind of a result we got, and move on to the next washes. So the first layer has pretty much dried perfectly. Now I'm switching over to a smaller brush. This is Silver Black Velvet, size 12. And what I'm gonna do now is start bringing in the different forms, different shapes, based on the very simplified drawing I have. Now, part of the magic here with, as I told you, my main focus here is to keep the water fairly bright and happy, is to never touch them again. I'm not gonna add anything to the water here. Even though normally I would maybe make some alternations, here I don't want to do that at all. I'm gonna allow the shadows under the boats here and here to play a role in that, and I'm just gonna leave the water to be. Okay, now I'm gonna start with this. There's a wall or the side of the dock here at the back. Now it's a shape that's fairly behind, so I don't want to make it too dark and I don't want to make it too strongly pigmented, so I'm just putting in a bit of a muted mix. I could even add a bit of the burnt sienna here just to mute it down a little, and it's fairly light too. You always want to have in mind the color, temperature, and value, okay? So I'm just gonna get started here, and I'm gonna make my way around the boat here at the bottom. That's the only thing that really is going to show. That's the edge here, never to be touched again. Maybe just a few highlights here and there, but I'm not keeping the highlights I see up top because that's gonna whack our sense of depth here. I don't want to do that. I can vary it a bit, put more blue to be dominant in some areas. It's a very unique composition that I'm not really used to as much because, you know, usually my paintings aren't cropped to look at the bottom like that. So it's a really good and interesting learning experience for me. Now there is some light over on this wall that I want to preserve. And around that, now here we get to a point that's really, we have to make a decision. So what I think I'm going to do is, I'm going to add some warmth, just a bit of it, a bit of the red here too. And that's where I'll start indicating the wall to the left, but I'm still going to keep it fairly light, okay? So something like that. And I wonder if I should put in some, you know what, let's do that kind of a connection, and that's it. Let's not even have the viewer ask or question what that is. Okay, I'm just putting in some random details here to the left. Maybe let's crop these. This is just what I'm doing now is pure compositional work. It doesn't represent anything, really. It only represents how I want the composition to be. Okay, so I know it's a bit funny, but that's the kind of thing you have to do if you want to get the impression you're after, sometimes. So that's a boat, believe it or not. And let's lighten up a bit. I'm going to put in this shadow that I see here up top. I'm going to put in this kind of a shape. Near the bottom of the boat there is a bit of a red stripe, so let's get that in. And now it's all about ripples. So it should be a little more on the blue side, but not fully. And the thing with these ripples that I didn't want to overdo is they're very far at the back. So what happens is they get squeezed. They get really, really squeezed into very thin lines, okay? So that's the one thing you want to pay attention to when you're putting these in. And I'll probably need to lighten them up a bit, and I probably need to get rid of this right section that I messed up. You see mistakes live because this part is white, so the reflection should be light. And I actually like the way it looks now, so let's keep it that way. I will add in a bit of strength to the left section and then connect it to the wall here that does have a couple of reflections as well. And back to the side of the boat, this time where the boat that's a little more to the back, like that. And hopefully I won't mess up the reflections this time. So here we go, just a bit of a reflection here. Let's put this thing while the background's still a little wet. This is purely compositional work. I want to start showing the viewer where the limits are. Okay, and whenever I do this kind of a thing, there is no guarantee, there is no assurance that it's gonna make sense. You have to kind of hope. Okay, now for this boat, let's keep it a pure blue. So something like that. That's the shadow of the boat here, the shadowy side of it. This should be a little flatter, which will make more sense. And a bit of a shadow underneath, like that. This is another boat, so there's maybe this dark section at the bottom, dark section at the bottom. One last boat here. Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't, but that's what we've got for now. Let's put in this kind of a zigzaggy shape. Let's add a bit of a reflection here and there. And hopefully that kind of sends it to the background without doing too much. Now there is this kind of a pipe here. I'm not sure what it is that I want to get in. In fact, let's continue this all the way to the bottom. I like the way it looks. Now let's add a bit of a shadow underneath, kind of a blue indication. Wet in wet, we're gonna get these details of the sides. A bit of a shadow here. Connected to the boats just for the bit of a harmony sake. I do think that there's a line here that if I just touch up on, it will improve, which is this line, so let's do that. In fact, let's bring some pure yellow This is yellow ochre. This is M. Graham paints, by the way. I love them. They're so good. And just add a couple of details here and there. Maybe a bit of red. And I think that settles the background. So that's a background for you. And I like the fact that it's a little on the impressionistic side. Let's put in just a bit of water here, even though it's almost dry, just to lighten that section up. And now we can move on to the main section, which is these boats. Now here I'm going to be a little more careful. Actually, let me sit down. I'm a little farther from the camera now, but I do want to be able to see things a little more clearly. Now we'll get started with the shadow under the boats. So what I see here is a bit of black around the sides. Let's start with that. And I'm just rendering what I see right now. So that's... there isn't an awful lot of things I can say about it, but it's more of a demonstration kind of thing. But I am trying to figure out how I can verbalize more of this process. But basically I see a lot of black here, so I'm going to get started with black. But notice how there's also a red stripe under it. So I'm going to get that stripe in. Let's go around this part that's beveled outside and get the left section as well. And now we'll get to the red. I'm going to get it individually, so not wet and wet. I'm actually going to place it in right now. With lots of pure red. I have here two different reds, but they're both warm. That's what I want here, a bit of warmth. Like that. Now this is a little too dark to show properly. So I'm going to switch to a lighter blue. I can go over this later with a more cadmium-y, orangey type of red, sorry, I just said blue, later on. But this is a little more like it, okay? And then you get this nice little on the side here. But then I'm going back to the black, so mixing again the very dark paint. And you notice how all of my dark mixes are just the same. It's the mix I'm using my primaries to get. So that's how I always work. I mix everything with my primary colors. I don't have a black color because I don't really like that. It feels almost like it sticks out too much for me. I don't like it as much. And here I'm just going to cover what I have with a bit of watery paint. The reason is there's already a shadow there, so I don't need to darken it too much compared to the white here. Let's get rid of that. Here we go. So it'll work nicely. I'm going to add a bit more opaque paint later on to it, so it'll make a bit more sense. But hopefully you can see how this starts to develop into something. And now here, onto the shadow, I'm going to have a very dark section of the shadow that reflects the dark pattern on the boat near the bottom. So I'm going to place that in as well. I'm going to need more paint. It looks dark, but there's a lot of water on the paper. Sometimes something will really look dark, but because there's so much water on the paper, it's just an illusion. And then I'm going to go back into some lighter values because of to express the white on the boat. I know it's a bit strange, but that's how I like to work on these kinds of things in sections. And then around that, we're going to have again a dark value. Okay, so I'm going back to some darks. And here you really want to pay attention to the ripples and the pattern that the reflection creates. You see, I'm rendering it as randomly as I can. Remember, nature is random, so you won't get too many, repeating shapes, or you have to disconnect from that habit of making everything very organized and, even. You have to be able to randomize at will. It's not easy, but it's a skill that you will improve with time. Okay? So hopefully I got a very random indication of the reflection here. It should be connected to this side, but you know what? I didn't build it to be that way, so I'm not gonna force it. So here we go, left boat is pretty much done. Now for the right boat, it's a little easier because its shadow is pretty much a pure blue. So let me get a bit of that phthalo blue in here just to get it to be more blue, because phthalo blue is so strong that as soon as I put it in, it will turn it into a proper blue. Here we go. And I'm gonna go, I don't know if less detailed, but it's not as important, this boat, for me. I'll try getting some very minimal patterns on it if I can, but I'm not gonna overthink this. Now, what's funny with this boat is it has a lighter section around the bottom here. So this section I'm gonna keep as white as what I currently have. But onto what I already put, I'm gonna put in this red indication that I see. And I can, again, go over all of these later on with some paint straight out of the tube just to bring back the redness of it, because that's a really some dry paint. Here we go. And so near the bottom I'm gonna leave a light stripe, but then I'm gonna go back to dark, as you can see here. Add a bit of blue to that, this time French ultramarine, because it's no longer the phthalo blue of the side of the boat, but the boat does have a pattern on it, so let's get that wet and wet while we can, you see? And let's mimic it on the other side. The other side, in fact, should be blue, but I'm going to keep it white. It's just going to make the painting a little easier. The result will be easier on the eyes. And now let's go back to some of the watery reflections or ripples. And here, I will add, I think, later on some of the red. We'll see, maybe I can get some of that wet and wet. So thank you, Ruth, for barking, making noises during the video. Sorry about that. That's the first time it happens, actually, which is funny. I would imagine that it would have already happened before. But in any case, here is the very bottom part of the boat. Now I have to mimic this line here. So here we go, just kind of a straight line with a bit of wobbliness to it. And connect it here, a little larger, I think. And I like having a couple of edges of the ripple that are a little hard or dry brushed. I think it leads to a very interesting variety. And then we have this thing here that I still haven't even painted, but let's do the ripples here, just to show that it makes sense that it should be there. And I think with that we're pretty much done with the ripples. Let's get some of the floats in here. I'm going to try and keep this stage a little shorter. I don't know, I don't want this to... This usually is the stage where you can take so much time and really show everything and build everything really slowly. I don't want to necessarily do that here. I'm actually quite pleased with what I've got so far. So here's one. These ones are going to be a little in the shadow, so let's cover the whole thing up. Maybe leave a bit of a highlight here. Now what we have to do is take care of the inside of the boats. That's the only thing we haven't put yet. So the inside of the boat I'm going to use, as I mentioned, the phthalo blue, a much cooler, brighter type of blue. Keep it very light because I still want to show how bright and light these are. But here I am going to render around highlights. So we've got a couple of highlights here and there, leaving in some details. This isn't going to be perfect. It's very hard, actually, I find, to get every little detail within the boats indicated, so I'm just going to do my best and put in what I can see. This should all be, in fact, in the shadow, so let's go over it like that. And I'm going to keep this thin white highlight around the bottom, but I'm going to cover this edge, and I'm going to keep this thing here. Now it's time to put in the shadows within the shadows. So a bit of a darker version of that blue and maybe a bit of red. And because here we have a bunch of items and also some, shadows on the sides of the boat. And if you can get these all in one go, that's the best. Because it's the least overworked result for me. That's what I love. So if I can just get an indication of all of these details in one go, I'm fine with that. A bit of yellow, because I do see a bit of yellow here for this net, I think. That's what it is. And I think that's it for this one. I can add later on some dry brush details. This is a very common color for the inside of a boat, actually. And it's very similar to phthalo blue, I think, because phthalo blue is a color that's used a lot in many industries. So it actually makes sense that you will see a lot of this color pretty much everywhere, not just in the pigment and paint industry, which is pretty cool when you think about it. So I'm going to add a bit of, makes it easier to paint it, that's for sure. I'm going to go over this, around the highlights here, around this piece of cloth or whatever that is. And as before, I'm going to start putting in the shadows. I'm doing this wet and wet, even though this shadow has some clear edges, but I don't really care about those right now, so I'm gonna put them in wet and hope that some of it will be preserved. A bit of this here, a little darker, so let's do that. Let's add a smaller shadow here for fun. This is starting to dry, so I could just put a few more details in. And I think with that we're pretty much done. Let's just add a couple of the, the details that pop out of the boats. So we've got some of them very interesting colors actually. Not blue, not black, it's kind of a warm. Let me try and get this in just by pressing my rigger brush. See, the rigger brush can be a little tricky to get lines to look accurately, to look accurate, sorry. So sometimes just pressing on it will provide the best result. Not really in this case, but that's fine. Whatever. I'm gonna add this line in, you see, a bit of details on it, but once again, we're going for that simplified impressionistic look that we all know and love. Some people don't like it, that's fine. Sometimes I go for a more realistic look as well. This one, I just feel like having fun. Now there's a bit of red here. I'm gonna add all of these in a more felt manner in a moment with some dry paint. Okay, so don't worry about that. But just a couple of details to get this going. I'm gonna put in the ropes. Some of the areas may be a little wet, but that's fine. I'm gonna put them in later as well, and a bit of ripples. Then we have this other rope that goes like that, gets to the water, a few ripples. These, I think I'll wait for them to dry. Here's something that I do want to do. I do want to do that. I want to put in some ripples with dry brush, like I showed you before. Because the thing is, normally, again, I don't want to overdo the water here, but what's beautiful about this is that they're going to contrast the wet and wet one. So notice already this dry one on wet and wet, it looks really good together, and it causes some things to come into the focus of the painting and some things to be pushed back, and I love that kind of effect. When you layer dry and hard edges with wet edges, just looks good. I think that's as much as I can do without overworking it. So now let's let this rest for a few more minutes, add some details, and wrap it up. So quite honestly, the painting is now done. Notice how beautiful the contrast is between these boats in the background that have these very striking highlights on them actually, and then these boats in the foreground. I think it has a nice little thing going on, but now what we're gonna do is work on making the focal point a little better. Okay, we'll do that by adding some details. I'm gonna cheat a bit with my white pen that I love the most, and then with some cadmium red deep, a very nice, kind of semi-opaque, but still very light and strong paint to use straight out of the tube. Now, one more thing I want to do before we get to that, okay? And that's something, again, compositionally it's gonna work. I feel like the background and foreground are a little detached. So what I'm gonna do is just make these shadows a little longer and have some of them reach towards us. Okay, so that's one. Connected a bit. And that's another one that I'll keep a little farther, but still. Okay, so hopefully that works out. There's another boat here. And that's it. Now let's start with the white. And the white, obviously, I'm going to use to bring out some things that I didn't want to preserve, which is something like this entire thing that comes out of the boat. And you let me know what it is. You could use opaque watercolor paint for this too. It doesn't really matter. I like this pen sometimes more. So here we go. There's a bunch of hooks there. This does have a bit of a highlight. And sorry if you can't see me actually do it. There's this thing here that I left. This kind of a part, I don't know what it's responsible for. And then we have a couple of highlights around the edge here, and a bit of this thing going on with, I don't know what kind of thing to hold ropes or something like that. These I'm going to add in just a moment, some more details too. We have the ropes for the floats, and most importantly is this thing to really show it through, and also this rope. And you see how some of the red actually got into the pen, which I love, I don't mind that. What else? Do we want to add some light highlights somewhere around here? I think no, I think we'll leave this part empty. There is this stripe, let's get some of that in, like a white stripe here, and then blend some of that back. Now I think that's enough for the pen. Let's start bringing in some very nice strong reds. This will enhance our focal point, make it pop a little more and make it a little more significant, okay? So here's the paint I've got. You see it's very, very strong and light. I used this already, I think, in a different video. I just don't remember which one. So let's get started with some of the floats. You see how it just makes them a little stronger and more striking. A bit of that here as well. Just gives them some more strength, okay? The paint I used before is fairly muted and watered down, and I wanted to bring back some of that. I'll actually add that as a highlight here, so just a few of these. I did say I'll add a bit of it to the shadow, to the reflection. Let's add a bit of a reflection for that here. You see, and the audience's eyes will be able to read these as, oh, okay, that's just reflections for the floaters. So here we go. Now here's another thing. I want to put in this kind of a red, I don't know, flag or whatever that is. That really pulls our attention to this section. And this red line, again, I told you we may need to strengthen it. So here we go. Notice what big of a difference that made. Just brought it to the forefront, and this side especially, because this one's exposed to the light. The left section I don't need to do too much with. Maybe add a bit of this here. And believe it or not, this one's done. I'm going to close the cap on this, the paint, so that it doesn't dry. And what I think I'll do is just basically sign this and lift back, take out the tape, sorry, because that's really what's going to give this a nice shape. And, you know, I know everyone loves that. For me, it doesn't really make a huge difference. Let me just sit down for a moment, and I'm going to sign this real quick. For me, I just wanted to say removing the tape isn't necessarily that critical in seeing the painting clearly. I actually see the painting clearly from the beginning to the end, or even I don't feel like I need to have a frame, but I know some people enjoy seeing that. Liron. By the way, I'm starting to sell my paintings, so I'll probably start sharing links. I'll keep you updated, probably on my website. Most of them are going to be larger pieces and a bit more pricey, I think, but I'm going to try and have some maybe lower cost paintings. So now let's remove the tape, and I'm going to get started here from the side like that. And onto this section here. Nice clean edges. And this side. I really hope you enjoyed this one, and now let's wrap it up face to face. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one, and hopefully I was able to preserve that beautiful light feeling of the surface of the water. Again, I try to often work on specific things, targeting specific problems in my painting process and habits that I don't like as much, and sometimes I do tend to darken too much, and I'm actually very happy with how all of these, the background stayed quite light. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I hope you enjoyed this experience. I hope you learned something new. Please leave this video a like if you enjoyed it. It means a lot to me, and it makes YouTube push the video onto more and more people. And also subscribe if you haven't, and check out the other videos. I have tons of other ones like this one, processes, and then just talks about creativity, productivity for artists even, and different artists and types of paintings that I love. So I'm gonna wrap this one up, and I will see you again in the next vid real soon.